Today we're looking at the 1999 matches between Mariko Yoshida and Hiromi Yagi, including the 1999 Joshi Puroresu Match of the Year from February 18th at Tokyo Korakuen Hall, where Yoshida defends her Queen of ARSION title. Yoshida spent the first year of ARSION training girls that had just left AJW, JWP, and LLPW in a new grappling-oriented style that revolutionized Joshi Puroresu, quickly establishing herself as the top trainer in the female game. One of Yoshida's biggest successes was Yumi Fukawa, a hard worker who was never pushed in AJW because she was deemed too small. Fukawa completely revamped her style and wound up being the most improved wrestler of 1998. Another of Yoshida's initial successes was prodigy rookie Mika Aquino, who was good enough to challenge Yoshida for the Queen of ARSION title less than 6 months after her debut, though the promotion insisted on instead extolling all the super rookie virtue onto Ayako Hamada, because she was the daughter of legendary Pro Lucha pioneer Gran Hamada, even though she made no attempt to integrate herself into the primary style of the league, simply doing a high-flying Lucha Libre style without much personality. The pinnacle of the Yoshida style came at ARSION's first anniversary show, where Yoshida headlined against Hiromi Yagi, someone who wasn't one of the bigger names in the promotion, but was their best legitimate martial artist, Yoshida included. Yoshida didn't come from a martial arts background. She just trained in the AJW dojo under the legendary Jaguar Yokota, making her wrestling debut in 1988. In 1992, she shifted to a more high-flying style based upon her Mexican excursion, where she trained with Grand Apache, among others. This wound up being a brief period in her career, though, as she suffered a cervical spine injury in October 1992. During the 21 months she was out of action, she fell in love with the UWF style, and began training under Yoshiaki Fujiwara. Unfortunately, AJW never really allowed her to showcase this submission style, putting her in Manami Toyota's Freedom Force, where she did high work rate spectacle, and having her continue her Lucha Libre style, defeating Lady Apache for the CMLL Women's title on February 6, 1997. Yoshida reinvented herself as a grappling ace upon leaving AJW later in 1997. All Yoshida's ARSION matches from 1998 through mid-1999 are more or less recommended, but her best opponent during this period was Hiromi Yagi, who was a high school judo champion with sambo training, and a generally great athlete who possessed body control like no other. Yagi is quite simply one of the most underrated wrestlers to have ever competed. She arguably even ranks above Momoe Nakanishi and Azumi Hyuga, who became the aces of their promotions, as the most talented woman to debut in the 1990s. Yagi never reached her ridiculous potential because she retired after 3 years due to marriage, then came back the next year as a part-time freelancer, but between being tiny and not being committed to a particular promotion, there wasn't a lot of impetus for anyone to build around her, as AJW and JWP ultimately had to do with Momoe and Azumi because they simply had no one else near their talent level. Yagi had the same problem in JWP that Yoshida had in AJW, and that she was never really able to showcase her grappling skills because there weren't any other shooters in the promotion. She instead fit in doing a flashier, more junior heavyweight style that incorporated some judo throws and arm bars. Given this was still early days in the transition to the Yoshida style, the key to this match was Yoshida didn't need to train Yagi to follow along with her like she did with the other girls. After all, Yagi grew up reacting to real threats and utilizing all the practical offensive and defensive positions, so all of this was more natural to her than it was to even Yoshida. The mistake with Yoshida's submission-oriented style in the ARSION era is to want it to be something grappling-oriented that came before it, such as UWF or World of Sport. It never tried to follow the logic of work shoots or European catch wrestling. If anything, it's more an answer to the laziness and unbelievability of Yoshida's old promotion, All Japan Women, particularly exemplified by her old quote-unquote mentor, Manami Toyota, applying meaningless submission holds with no conviction, or just laying around screaming in someone else's to kill time during the early portion of the matches. While Toyota would save her effort and energy for the high spots she actually cared about, Yoshida's style only incorporated things people wanted to be doing, and required effort and energy to be exerted in all areas. For the most part, anything that required the obvious cooperation of the opponent standing or laying around waiting was removed, as wrestlers could do what they wanted, but they had to earn it with a credible entry, capture, or counter. In a sense, the style was similar to the hard gym sparring Masakatsu Funaki gravitated towards early in the 1990s, but while also taken seriously and done without flourish, Yoshida strived to maintain the high-pace, action-oriented Joshi style, while Funaki was content with the more realistic stalling out through control. Yoshida's style wouldn't be for DDP, who despite being a hard worker who could craft a dramatic match around his diamond cutter finisher, thrived on choreographing every aspect of his matches he could get away with, so it's unlikely he would have excelled in an environment that was far closer to being all reaction than all scripting. This definitely isn't a style for Mr. Gedo Bato Kazuchika Okada, as Yoshida would probably just allow him to short-circuit rather than pose the marionette for 30 minutes until his finishing program finally kicked in. Yoshida's style is more towards exploring what wrestling would look like if both fighters always had to be on guard, putting effort into defending themselves and trying to find openings for their offense. This is a style where they never stop moving, and every movement counts because there are no handouts. It took some wrestlers longer to adapt to the style than others, but because there was some realism involved, in the sense that the opponent wouldn't necessarily just give an opening and flow with it. Everyone who faced Yoshida tried to beat her standing because Yoshida was their grappling instructor, the obvious ace. Tonight's title match was different though, as right off the bat, when Yagi took her air raid crash finisher, she seemed to decide she was going to either beat Yoshida on the mat or force Yoshida to outmaneuver her there. This led to one beautiful flowing series after another, as Yagi had answers for everything Yoshida did. Yoshida would try for an armbar, but Yagi would quickly counter with a knee bar. One of Yagi's tone-setting counters saw her turn Yoshida's single leg elevation, which was one of Yoshida's key transitions to the mat, into an armbar. Yoshida always had both elbows taped up during this period, and there was a lot of focus on the arm here. However, it never felt like this was something necessary to give Yagi a fighting chance, because Yagi was so great that even though it was unlikely she would actually be booked to win, she didn't need storyline help to be competitive because her technical skill and ability to adjust to and answer everything Yoshida did gave her the credibility that was often absent in Yoshida's opponents. This was unfortunately one of the only matches where we got to witness just how good Yagi could be with positioning. She kept maneuvering into rear mount especially, looking for the choke. There were some lovely scrambles, and it was a more believable touch that they didn't always lead right into a high spot. For instance, Yoshida turned into a wakigatame from Yagi's German suplex bridge, but Yagi rolled and took her back, just pulling Yoshida down when Yoshida blocked the suplex, and working for a choke. This match was never dull because the movement was so cool, but it also understood that in order to maintain some air of believability, they had to avoid instant gratification, and the phony, I'm simply too tough to submit brand of drama. This wasn't about showy submissions, or big corny mannerisms, but rather knowing how to move and counter in a legitimate grappling environment. Because they always had to be moving to position and reposition themselves, as in MMA, they built up a great deal of tension we otherwise never see in pro wrestling. The audience could understand that countering the backdrop by weighing down on the opponent in a side headlock wasn't a rest hold, and actually worked well on its own. They followed with the Yagi bridge out into an armbar, but the action could breathe first because the smaller moves and movements were invested in more or less just as much as the high spots. Yagi had mostly competed in tag so far in ARSION, having won their inaugural tag title tournament with Rie Tamada on December 7, 1998. Their tag title defense over Yoshida and Aquino on February 1, 1999, and a singles upset over Mikiko Fudagami on January 7th were the main reasons she got this opportunity. However, every time she answered Yoshida, she became more and more believable while increasing the tension of the match. Yagi is easy to get behind because she's so energetic and spunky. A great competitor who cares about winning and thus shows a lot of determination. The match had the cumulative effect of impressing the audience through what they don't do. While they did a great job portraying the struggle, they never got overdramatic or stuck with anything much past its expiration date, switching to a different attack rather than burning themselves out while straining credibility. There's really nothing here that distracts from their desire to win the match. Yagi learned from the initial air raid crash and kept having answers for it. The finish saw Yagi turn it into a sunset flip, but Yoshida answered with a choke and just kept adjusting till she finally put Yagi out. I give this match 4 3/4 stars out of 5. It was the Joshi Puroresu match of the year for 1999, and the second best match in the history of ARSION, behind Yoshida vs Megumi Fujii on May 24, 2003. Yoshida was Women's Wrestler of the Year for 1999, but in her brightest moment, Yagi was actually the more entertaining and impressive of the two. This was the best match of Yagi's career. in part because it was the showcase of the brief period where any promoter or booker actually used her properly. Yoshida understood the greatness of Yagi, and after losing to Candy Okutsu in Candy's debut as Tiger Dream, the first female character based upon Tiger Mask, on August 31st, 1998, Yagi was very successful in ARSION. They had an excellent rematch in the semifinal of the ARS 99 tournament on May 4th at Tokyo Korakuen Hall, after Yoshida defeated Yumi Fukawa in an excellent 4¼ star quarterfinal. The Yoshida vs Fukawa match was arguably the most memorable of the night, because it was the point where Fukawa truly arrived, showing so much heart, desire, determination, and improvement that she became credible even against the top grappler in the league, and really made you care whether she won. It's one of the best under 12-minute matches ever, with Fukawa giving such a passionate underdog performance, paving the way for Yagi's victory over Yoshida by attacking Yoshida's left arm with everything she could think of, and then some. The Yoshida vs Yagi ARS 99 semifinal was an excellent follow-up to their 2/18/99 classic. At 13 minutes 39 seconds, when both had already worked a quarterfinal and Yagi still had a final to work, it was a bit truncated compared to the 20 minutes 36 seconds of their title match, but I wouldn't be surprised if some people found it even more enjoyable because it was faster paced, more dynamic contests where they eliminated some of the more realistic setup and feeling out, packing as much action as they could into the time they had. They didn't break a lot of new ground, but their familiarity with one another resulted in a slicker match that was one of the more exciting matches in the Yoshida style, and once again one of the top Joshi matches of 1999. It didn't quite have the drama of Yoshida vs Fukawa, as Fukawa gave a more charismatic performance than Yagi, but Yagi is on a whole different level technically, with much more precision and explosion in her attack than just about everyone. I like that Yagi was confident in her ability to win one way or another, so she wasn't just forcing the arm work the way Fukawa was. Yoshida did a great job of selling the arm here, having it cost her a couple chances at victory. Yoshida delivered 2 classics in one night, while Yagi scored arguably the biggest singles win of her career here with a Wakigatame, handing Yoshida just her 3rd loss in the 15-month history of ARSION. I rate this semifinal 4¼ stars. Yagi losing the final to Michiko Omakai was okay in the sense that she had to give all she had in order to upset Yoshida, while Omakai somehow had a 2-move win over Candy in the semifinal. Yagi continued to be pushed in the next few months with a 15-minute draw against Aja Kong and wins over Ayako Hamada and Candy Okutsu. Tragically, Yoshida was only the trainer in ARSION, and Rossi Ogawa and Aja Kong completely abandoned the Yoshida style just after all Yoshida's hard work and determination had finally got it over with the audience, with Kong taking the title from Yoshida on August 6, 1999. Aja then squashed Yagi in the first round of the Jun 99 tournament on August 22, 99, and Yagi was paired with Chaparita Asari the rest of the year, shifting to junior-style matches as ARSION became a jack-of-all-trades, master of none. Yagi made limited appearances for ARSION after 1999, with Wrestle Yume Factory being her primary promotion in 2000, while Big Japan was her main home in 2001 and 2002. Meanwhile, Yoshida was once again defeated by Kong at the year-end show on 12/11/99, and had to resort to teaming with Kong to get the tag titles off Yagi and Rie Tamada on March 15, 2000, only to immediately lose them to Michiko Omakai and Mima Shimoda on April 7th. While Yoshida would still be able to do her thing from time to time if the opponent was willing, for instance a memorable rematch with Yumi Fukawa on September 26, 99, and her all-time classic with future women's MMA GOAT Megumi Fujii on May 24, 2003, it wasn't until she opened Ibuki on June 5, 2005 that we witnessed not only a return to her grappling style, but actually another evolution.